This is the Hello World podcast, where we talk about habits of success, habits of excellence, entrepreneurship, leadership, learning and development, and outlook that will help us succeed through life. This is Louis Banta, CEO and Chief Trainer of Learning Just Made Better, or LJMB. And this is episode 20 of the Hello World podcast. And episode 20 is all about that L in hello, leadership. Our guest for today will talk about inclusive leadership, why a psychologically safe environment matters, and how to create one. Our guest is a curious and enthusiastic professional who has been working in Australia and across the Asia-Pacific region with systems, technology, and processes for more than 13 years. He's worked for IBM and other multinationals and is the founder and CEO of Human Capital Realisation, or HCR, a fast-growing company based in Australia that helps organizations in the Asia-Pacific region empower their people through innovative learning tools in HR tech solutions. HCR leads the way in helping organizations make informed and quick decisions through a smart organization chart, making learning more efficient and effective by creating engaging online learning experiences for their employees, and increase productivity, engagement, and profitability while reducing accidents through measuring and improving psychological safety in the workplace. Our focus for today. Although most of HCR customers are in Australia, they're continuing to expand their reach into the culturally diverse economic powerhouse that is Southeast Asia. Our guest holds a Bachelor of Social Science in Psychology and a PhD in Philosophy from Swinburne University of Technology. And our guest has also reached out to LJMB in the past 3 months. We appreciate him attending one of our virtual classes and also becoming a regular follower of our LinkedIn posts. Our guest for episode 20, Peter Grace.
Hello, world. And hello, Louis. Thank you very much for having me on the podcast today.
I should thank you more for making time, especially that it's 8:30 in the evening from where you are.
That's true, but it's good to be here.
And thank you, Peter, for posting all of those value-adding content in LinkedIn. Yeah, I saw you talking about psychological safety, really promoting this topic and even sharing some resources. And now here we are addressing our community of listeners in the Hello World podcast to do a deep dive on this one. How did you get interested in psychological safety?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I have core values of fairness and equality. They're really important to me. And I think, like all of us, at times we experience anxiety sometimes and fear at work. You know, we sometimes might have an aggressive team leader or a boss who never listens to us. So having experienced that and having found that there is a way to actually systematically measure and improve psychological safety, I really felt I had to do something about this. So I became very interested, read a lot about it, found a great solution, and very happy to promote it. And I hope it benefits a lot of people.
The concept is really interesting. Two words that you put together, psychological and safety. What is that concept of psychological safety and what is it not?
Yeah, well, we think of safety at work and we think about physical safety, right? People avoiding accidents, they don't get hurt, which obviously is really important. But psychological safety is basically, it's very simple. It's when you as a team member feel accepted and respected, then you feel psychologically safe. So in that kind of environment, you feel like you can bring your whole self, your whole personality to work. All your traits, all your abilities can contribute to the effort of the team. It's something that exists at a team level, even more than an individual level. And of course, when you bring all your traits and abilities to work, that's sometimes what makes it hard, because people have different and diverse traits and abilities. And that's what adds so much value to an organization, but it also can create a bit of friction. Um, and psychological safety is not all about, peace, love, and hugs. It's about feeling free to speak up.
Mhm.
And of course, when you speak up, your boss might not always want to hear what you have to say. But really, that's where the value comes in. And that's the highest level of psychological safety, is when people feel free to actually challenge ideas and bring in some new ideas of their own. I think of it a bit like a safety harness, right? So,
Mhm.
if a worker is up on a tall building, they'd normally be required to wear a safety harness. So that the safety harness is a bit like psychological safety. It enables you to maybe reach a bit higher, to be able to focus on what you're doing instead of having to worry about falling on your face, right? And,
Mhm.
if we come up with an idea, there's no guarantee it's going to be a good idea. So if we feel safe that we could maybe fall on our face, if you like, with that idea, and maybe even admit that it's not a good one, then we're going to be freer to actually contribute those ideas and improve the organization.
And as I'm listening to how you define psychological safety, a lot of terms and concepts that are or everybody's familiar with come to mind.
Mm.
Listening. You mentioned values of respect and fairness as well. Uh, I
Yeah.
also I also thought of the opposites, and please validate if these are related to psychological safety as well. The behaviors of bullying and discrimination, or
Yeah.
could they be threats to psychological safety? And on the positive side, when people feel free to challenge each other, you used that word earlier, that's really a hallmark of teamwork, because you
Mm.
can only collaborate better if everybody's free to really speak up and challenge an opinion and later on come up with a better solution.
Yes.
What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, bullying is a perfect example of a psychologically unsafe environment. And psychological safety has, I mentioned that the highest level where you feel free to challenge. The minimum that you would expect in a psychologically safe environment is that you feel included, you feel part of the team. And the research has shown that people who are from marginalized or diverse backgrounds, that's even more important to them than others who may be part of the in group. If
Mhm.
you've come from a different environment, a different culture, maybe you have a different way of thinking to other people, you appreciate that inclusion more than anybody else. And you get so much more out of it, and you're able to contribute so much more to the team. Once you feel included in the team, the next level up is when you can learn. You feel safe to take on new information and start to use that. So the learner, something you'd be interested in, Louis, the freedom to learn and the freedom to feel safe to take on new ideas is something, another aspect of psychological safety that's really important. And straight away you can see the benefits to the organization if people feel comfortable to learn, because you often feel the person who's feeling insecure, they don't want to try new things, right? They don't want to learn new stuff because they're worried that they'll expose themselves to ridicule or to making mistakes. But in a psychologically safe environment, you can take those risks even a little bit, learn something new and start to practice it. And the next level up is contributing. So actually contributing those ideas to the organization is the next highest level before you get to the point of being able to actually challenge ideas. And many organizations are on a journey to psychological safety. You can't just change it instantly. there's a process to improving it.
And you got my interest there on the second level, as you mentioned, it's about learner safety.
Yeah.
Does that also include the feeling that it's safe to make mistakes, that it's okay to just bear yourself out there and say something wrong?
That's a key point. And yes, you recognize that well. And I'm sure when you're training people, you probably see that. Some people are afraid to take on a new idea or to share it. But psychological safety, it kind of gives you that safety harness, if you like. You go, even if I stumble in trying to use something that I've just learned, I'm not going to be made fun of. I'm not going to be fired or let go. My boss is not going to be angry with me. In a psychological safe environment, it's great to try new things.
As you continue to describe what it is and what it is not, a lot of memories would flash in my mind, Peter, that
Right?
a lot of people, including myself, now I've been with, and I'm also guilty of behaviors, and I've been in situations when, oh, I created, I observed, and I allowed an what's the best term? Unpsychologically safe environment happen. So
Mm.
yeah, I've been either a party, a guilty party, or I saw things happening and I didn't do anything about it. Why why does a psychologically safe environment matter?
Well, you know, the way you express it, Louis, it's one of the reasons is it's just the right thing to do, right? So you feel bad if you're involved in that kind of behavior as someone who's doing it. You feel bad if you're on the receiving end of it. It's obvious from that, isn't it, that it's ethically wrong to have an environment that's unsafe psychologically. So to me, that could be the greatest reason, right? It's simply the right thing to do.
Mhm.
But there are other compelling reasons as well. In fact, it even brings financial benefits. We had a case study of an Australian clothing retailer. They You might not think of psychological safety as being important in a retail environment, but they found there were a few problems there. They focused on psychological safety, and they actually increased their revenue per store by more than $30,000. So that was worth $21 million to them every year
Wow.
just from improving psychological safety in a retail environment. And I think it's particularly so when people are facing customers, right? Because that's a stressful environment anyway, whether you're in a call center or whether you're facing customers face to face. You want to feel like you have your team behind you. So that if you have a really rough encounter with a customer, it happens, call centers, it happens in retail face to face, that you want to feel that you can fall back in your team. That was terrible. I think I handled that wrong. How could I do better? So that's what psychological safety enables you to do. And it tends to relate to many different KPIs as well. So, company growth as well as revenue. Um, um, Employee engagement is another one where psychological safety makes a big difference. So there are many reasons why it's important.
And interesting that there was the financial connection or connection to financial metrics. And there
Yep.
could be that missing link there. You simply increase psychological safety and really increase revenues. Um, I could imagine in customer service, some people who make a mistake, frontliners who may commit certain violations, if they don't have psychological safety, they might just address problems on their own without consulting, peers and managers,
Yeah.
which can make things worse.
Yeah.
That's how I can also connect those two things, Peter. And also in terms of innovation, I can see the connection when if I feel safe, I just suggest anything that I believe can help the company. And for all
Yes.
you know, that idea could really be either revenue generating or can be a big cost saving initiative.
Exactly right. So you want to feel safe to be able to contribute that idea, in a respectful way, but to again feel safe that you won't be ridiculed or put down. And it's often the case that a generational gap makes that occur. So young workers, the millennials who are coming into the workplace, they have grown up with technology far more than people of an older generation. So they probably have ideas of how technology could be used that older people might not have. So they need to feel free as a younger person amongst older person to be able to speak up as well. And that's another area where innovation comes from.
So when a boss, let's say, or a manager immediately shuts down a suggestion of a younger employee, let's say to use a specific tool or an improvement in the process, can that shutdown be considered violation of psychological safety, Peter?
It is because it makes that people feel unsafe to share their ideas and to bring their whole self to work. So bring their life experience to work. If they feel unsafe to do that, yeah, that's certainly a lack of psychological safety.
But then you spoke about generations. I'm a Gen Xer,
Right.
and yes, older generations to us, we did not have this term before, Peter. And I would say we're used to our managers 20, 30 years ago really adopting that authoritarian style, that traditional leadership of saying no, I don't
Yeah.
want that, no,
Yeah.
or it's my way that I want to ensure that my leadership is inclusive, and I also want as a leader, as a business owner, to now bring in psychological safety. Now knowing the benefits, no, it leads to financial effects or impact. How can I, as a business owner and leader, build inclusive leadership and psychological safety?
Yeah, I saw a survey recently that asked CEOs what their biggest fear was. And I don't know if you can imagine what their biggest fear might be. And I'm sure your listeners are probably thinking, well, what would the biggest fear of a CEO be? In fact, the most common answer was that I don't know what's going on. So something that your people at the front line know that doesn't get to you until it's too late, right?
Because of
There's
course
this
you're very high up at the top.
exactly, right? So a psychologically safe environment encourages that kind of communication up the tree, right? And if it starts at the top, if the leader is showing an example of being able to listen and, not ridicule, but accept and consider new ideas, encourage people to build their whole self to work, that example is going to flow down through the rest of the organization. But the work that I've done recently is about using a tool, a survey that's around 25, 30 questions that is focused on how people are feeling in the workplace. So it's not really about what they're doing or what they're thinking, it's what they're feeling.
Mhm.
And you can probably think of your own experience. Your feelings often drive the way you think, and the way you think drives what you do. So if you focus on how people are feeling, you're actually getting a very accurate picture of how the team is working together.
Mhm.
And you can then collate and collect that data, obviously very confidentially, because everyone has to feel, again, safe that what they answer is not going to be revealed to their bosses. But then you can analyze that data and visualize where are the problems within the organization. Are there pockets of psychologically unsafe teams? Are there areas where things are particularly good? And then you can look at, what is the cause of this, right? Is there a particular manager? For example, it often happens when team members are from one culture and the manager is from a different culture.
Mhm.
And the manager doesn't mean to instill an atmosphere of fear, but just a different way of dealing with employees due to their culture causes misunderstandings. The employees feel afraid to raise ideas or to challenge things. And often it's just a few conversations that need to be had to sort that out. But the beauty of having a real tool to measure psychological safety is that you can get an empirical and a rational view of where the problems are. So that's
Mhm.
where it starts. And then we'd work with an organization to help them implement some changes in processes, maybe change the culture a little bit, have a few conversations about what it means. And, most cases that works just fine.
Two things about what you mentioned. We really can't improve or manage what we do not measure.
Yes.
I like
Yes.
hearing that. So the same way that organizations administer employee engagement surveys to get a pulse of their employees on level of engagement, this one now is another tool that they can use to make sure that there's a culture that people may speak up or should speak up. The other thing that I got from what you mentioned is the intention of the manager may be different. There's no intention to harm or to
Yes.
exclude others, but the behavior may have a different impact. And for example, Peter, culturally, um, well, we also love jokes or light and fun moments at work,
Yes.
especially in teams. When you work together for quite some time, somebody cracks a joke, and sometimes those jokes are about a teammate. Yes.
Yes.
How do you know? How do you draw the line? Whether it's a clean, fun, decent way of having fun versus it's already ridiculing and the joke is actually a violation of safety. As a leader, I want to be able to also now increase my awareness. Oops, I should not say this. I should
Yeah.
say it differently. Now, because you said intention is different from impact. My intention is to lighten the mood of the group. I don't want it to end as somebody gets excluded or feels
Yeah.
lack of safety.
I'm sure we've all had the experience where we've told a joke like that, and immediately we wish we could take back what we said, right? I mean, in a psychologically unsafe environment, what will happen is the worker will, outside of the workplace, away from the manager, he or she will share the way they're feeling with somebody else, right? And they'll say, you know, my boss made this joke today, and I didn't say anything because I don't want to upset him, but I really feel bad about it. In a psychologically safe environment, they would feel free to maybe quietly approach their boss and say, I know you didn't mean harm, but that's a sensitive area for me. Please don't do that. Right? That's either way, it's going to come out, isn't it? Someone's going to say something, and it's always better if they will say it to you, and you can avoid doing it in the future. And you think of that employee, they are upset, they go back to their desk. Are they going to do good work? Are they going to be productive? Are they going to come up with good ideas? No, and this is where the financial benefits of psychological safety come in.
Hmm.
And it's
And
related also to, sorry, Louis.
go ahead, Peter. It's
It's
related to.
related also to physical safety because I use an analogy, but actually there is a direct connection between psychological safety and a lower rate of accidents. Because if you see something in the workplace that you believe would cause an accident or harm, in a psychologically safe environment, you're not going to say, that's not my job, that's not my responsibility. You're going to feel free to raise your concern and actually point it out. And one of the greatest examples of this is in healthcare. Um, many Filipinos are nurses, right? And how often is a nurse listened to by a doctor? In many cases, they'll be afraid to raise a concern because the doctor will be harsh and not listen. But how many cases have lives been saved by a nurse pointing out an error? That's a great example of how important psychological safety is in a workplace.
You threw in there factor of position titles or hierarchy.
Mm,
Nurse to doctor,
yeah.
let's say direct report to manager. Again, my interest now in our conversation is I'm becoming more conscious, Peter, that I may have really said something before, either long ago or maybe in the recent past, that may have really violated this one. What should I, as a leader, know? And to our listeners who are leading companies and teams out there, what should they know about psychological safety?
Well, to know the concept is great. To know that people, when they feel safe to bring their whole self to work, they will do better work. They will enjoy their work more. They'll return home happier, and your company will benefit also. So just to know the concept and be conscious of it, I think that's really important. I guess the second thing is to know that there are ways to measure psychological safety. And as you said, something that's measured will get attention paid to it. And something that's measured can be changed. So if you can get an empirical, objective measure of how psychologically safe your teams are, then you can actually start to see if you have a problem and then to address it.
You talked about that instrument, 25 to 30 items, as you mentioned. And what are the categories or buckets of items that you try to focus on, Peter?
So they're kind of areas of social needs. So it's things like, do you feel accepted? Right? Do you feel comfortable to share your viewpoint? Do you feel that your contribution is valued? Do you feel that you can challenge a decision that you've been given? So they're really quite simple concepts. It's a survey that doesn't take long to do. As I said, it taps into feelings rather than thoughts, which is a more accurate reflection of whether the workplace is psychologically safe or not.
And I assume that, especially with our work from home setup today, this survey can be accessible online and can also generate quick results, regardless of
Exactly.
the size of the organization.
Yeah, exactly right. So yes, can be done online. In exceptional circumstances, it can be done on paper. But
Mm-hmm.
whenever we do this on paper, there's a lot of steps to take to make sure that the envelopes are sealed, the employees know that it won't be open, that it'll be sent back to the consultants who are administering the survey. No one knows who's answered what question. You're looking at a team answer rather than an individual status.
So not just having a questionnaire, but the entire process of data gathering and taking care of the response has to also assure the employee or the person of safety. I love how it's really all about safety, and Peter, these questions are more quantitative, right? No qualitative questions. I'm trying to imagine how this could be of use to, of course, some of my clients, and to our listeners there who are in HR, who might be thinking of an instrument to measure psychological safety, just for them to imagine, would there be qualitative items as well that will probe
Yeah,
further for responses?
that's right. I mean, like just about all the psychological surveys you've ever seen, there's a 5-point scale, right? So, how strongly do you agree or disagree with this statement? So, you make that quantifiable assessment, but then there is room for comments as well. So, to actually put in something you want to say about the situation.
And I can also imagine that for organizations who have used the tool, they could also, on their own initiative, utilize focus group discussions, yes, or perhaps HR doing one-on-ones or with the concerned employees to provide more context to
Yeah.
the responses.
Exactly
Mhm.
right. I mean, when we work with organizations, certainly we'd have to involve HR, but in particular, we involve the higher level executives because it's got to be driven by that top level. Otherwise, it's just going to go up a certain way and then it's going to stop because there's psychological safety will stop at that level.
You mentioned top level. In
Yep.
my work with clients, Peter, several times I would hear that it's the top level who actually is perceived as barriers to psychological safety. Have you also ever come across that in your practice?
Definitely. And it's part of the nature of the job, right? You know, if you're a CEO in a large organization, it takes a certain personality type to get to that level, right? And unfortunately, amongst that group, there are some who wouldn't focus very much on psychological safety. But in the end, most CEOs have the interests of the company at heart, and they have the interest of the people at heart, because you can't do anything without your people. And I think increasingly, in a time where innovation is needed, people understand more and more that you cannot just treat a person as an object to do a piece of work. You need the whole person, the personality they bring, the background they bring, the experiences they bring, because that brings a richness to a team that you can't get if everyone's the same.
I like what you mentioned there. You cannot just treat somebody, yes, as a work unit, right? Who will
Yes.
just produce work volume. So before management or an individual leader can act, it really makes sense to go through that the diagnostic experience. How's the investment in time and money, Peter? Just for those who may be thinking of, I want that instrument too for my company.
Well, that's something we'd have to individually assess the company. So really look at the size of the company, what they do, how complex they are. So I can't really give anything off the top of
Okay.
my head, but it's not a quick fix, right? The
Mhm.
diagnosis, it can be done quickly, but if there are problems with psychological safety, you can't fix them overnight, because they're a team. It's a measure of the team, really. And that means you have to work with the individuals in the team. But the results are worthwhile. I mean, the World Health Organization has assessed that for every dollar you spend improving the mental health of an employee, which includes psychological safety, you get a 4 times return on that. So, you know, there's just in terms of increased productivity, there's a massive financial gain to be made.
4 times.
4 times,
Okay.
400%.
Mhm. So just yep, that psychological safety as a lever, as a key driver. Yeah. Here's where you have human resources and taking care of your people can actually translate to financial benefits. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, you called it a lever, a key driver. That's absolutely right. You know, in statistical terms, they call it a leading indicator. So
Hmm.
when your psychological safety rises, so does your productivity, engagement, physical safety, and even revenue. So they are all driven by that, which is why it's so fundamentally important.
You just emphasized, Peter, how why companies should invest time and money into improving this, because I assume a lot of leaders will look at psychological safety as a soft concept. You know how it goes to
Yes.
most C-suite will just say employee engagement, no, soft side of the business. But now you're giving here lots of facts, no, and figures that could change their minds
Yes.
into now looking at this as a leading indicator that could impact bottom line on the business.
And I remember from your course that I attended, speaking to CEOs, you said the primary interest in the CEO is a financial measure, right? So when we're talking to CEOs about this, we can stress that financial measure. But increasingly, you know, CEOs look at the ethical side of business as well, right? So you think of this as the right thing to do as well. And when you look at things like diversity, you know, employees who are diverse, so we're talking different cultural backgrounds, but also maybe employees who are differently abled, those who are neurodiverse, perhaps those on the autism spectrum, who bring, you know, a particular set of extremely intense skills to work. those are the ones who are most vulnerable to feeling psychologically unsafe because they're already feeling a bit on the outside. But if they can be feeling part of the team, really feeling included, feeling that they can learn, they can contribute, their set of skills that's diverse and unique can really add so much value to an organization.
So that's how this concept of psychological safety is very much linked to another phrase that we hear so often in organizations: diversity
Yeah.
and inclusion. And I guess, Peter, a lot of training has to be done in organizations because the typical employee is not trained to differentiate of my behavior is consistent with psychological safety or
Yeah.
it's not consistent. I think a lot of employees would require training on psychological safety. Well, what do you think?
I don't know because I mean, when you heard when we started talking about it, you immediately identified with it, didn't you? You said, "Oh, I can think of examples when psychological safety has been good or hasn't been good." So I don't think people need a lot of training to understand what it is. And sometimes it's just a change in processes that's required to implement that. I think people get the concept very quickly. They understand its importance. They understand its harm when it's not there. So, sometimes it's a matter of enabling people to do this. And, the problem may be a couple of levels further up the organization. And once that's fixed, the benefits will flow through very quickly.
You mentioned that phrase of it could be a matter of changing processes, or it could also be a matter of dealing with levels in the organization. Now we're talking about how do we now really improve after the diagnosis. Let's say we go through that instrument and we identify certain areas to work on, priority areas to work on. What could be ways to improve psychological safety in an enterprise?
So yeah, again, good question, and a lot would depend on what it is that's causing this problem of psychological safety, right? So if it's the particular style of a manager, right? Let's say that manager would love to hear his people's ideas, but his expressions are very direct, right? He likes to give orders, and the way that he gives those orders makes people feel afraid to raise any questions about that, right? So then it could be a case of working with that manager and saying, you can certainly tell people what to do. That's part of your role, right? But maybe the way that you do that needs to change so that they have an opportunity to ask questions or to suggest ideas. So it may not be a change in structure or role or anything like that, maybe just a change in the way that material or information is presented.
So leadership coaching, leaders also need to get coached on this.
That's a great way to look at it, right? And coaching would certainly be an element of change that would be required, yes.
But what if, Peter, there are some leaders who have been so ingrained in their ways for decades? Do they still, is there still hope that, yes, we can make them behave in ways that adhere to psychological safety?
Well, look, it's possible, right? And maybe the problem is that they don't feel psychologically safe, so they don't feel safe enough to take on learning a new way of doing things. So if they're supported by the very top level of the organization, Mr. CFO, try this different way and I will support you. Even if it causes, you difficulties initially, I will help you through that. That may be what the problem is. So I hear what you're saying. But most people love to learn, right? Most people love to learn new ways of doing things. They just need to feel safe to do so.
My insight in what you're saying now is two parties involved in that situation. The employee may not feel psychologically safe because the manager or the person in authority also may not feel psychologically safe to admit that I have to work on this. Oh, okay. It can be a systemic or culture thing, Peter, right?
Yes,
Um,
yes. As systemic and cultural, that's a good way to look at it. I mean, psychological safety is not culture, but it influences the culture of the organization, and it is itself influenced by that culture. So the two are very much wrapped up. And culture, I mean, the best way I've heard it described is, it's what it's like to work at this place. That's the culture. If someone asks you, what's it like to work here? The answer that you get is going to reflect what the culture is. And psychological safety is going to be an element of that.
and now thinking of, especially for Asia and specifically for the Philippines, a lot of my clients talk about speaking up in the workplace, encouraging people to speak up. There seems to be a cultural barrier. You know that Asians are non-confrontational, and there seems to be that deference to authority. I believe that's a major barrier, and that needs to be addressed so that an organization can increase psychological safety.
Yes. So maybe there is a particular way in that culture to be able to raise a new idea. Maybe it's not so direct to the boss who's telling you what to do. Maybe there's another avenue or another channel that could be used. Some a suggestion box, for example, that's actually listened to, or a team area where people feel safe to raise new ideas. It's got to vary by the culture of the organization, which is also shaped by the culture of the geography where that organization is.
Peter, this is really very interesting for me. I'd read case studies of global companies, successful companies. And to cite a few, there are some in the tech or Silicon Valley. In Netflix, there it's a very popular case study on culture that they give direct feedback to each other. Is giving direct feedback automatically lack of psychological safety? Or is there a way to give direct feedback but yet preserve safety?
I mean, direct feedback can be a symptom of very high psychological safety in that people feel comfortable to be able to do that. But if you think of Google, an American headquartered company, the part of their culture is to be quite direct, isn't it? And in that situation, it's an indicator possibly of high psychological safety. In a different culture, that might not work so well, but you still need a way to make people feel comfortable in challenging the status quo because that's where innovation comes from.
My takeaway here is the concept of psychological safety. The concept itself is the same across cultures. It's how the culture addresses the barriers to safety that they differ.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard this, the Philippines is not ready for psychological safety. And I, I actually disagree with that. I think everywhere is ready to look at and try and improve psychological safety. It's just the way that it's done has to be done in a way that's sensitive to the culture of where it's done.
And to your point earlier, it could be providing the right venue, providing the right mechanism for people to be able to speak.
Yes. And even talking to you, it's great to be able to think about those different ways that this could be done in different cultures. And, it would have to be done in a way that is psychologically safe.
And you really got me convinced, Peter. I came into this podcast knowing the concept. I did a few readings on this one. I've heard of this before, and now really understand the biggest impact on me, Peter, is that I'm now thinking. You got me thinking into, did my behaviors the past week, the past month, or this year uh, created higher psychological safety, or did it reduce it? But nothing I can do anymore about the past. Yes.
Exactly.
So moving forward, I'll be more conscious with the tips that you mentioned on how a leader should listen more, practice fairness and respect. And I also advocate a more direct approach to feedback or calling things out. I'll also make sure that the team is psychologically safe for us to be able to give and receive. I think it's a two-way process. If you give direct
Oh, yeah.
feedback and the other person receives it well, it's psychological safety.
Exactly, a great point, right? The boss needs to feel safe too, that he can direct his employees when direction is needed, right? And sometimes a suggestion is needed, sometimes a direction is needed, right?
So the managers can also answer that survey. I'm now thinking of analyzing the data from that tool. Employees have their average ratings and managers too, because to your point, a manager should feel psychologically safe calling out or giving feedback. Now that's a
Mm,
powerful insight for me. You got me interested on that instrument, and I know that HCR does that as a service to organizations. Yes,
mm.
I'll let you talk more about how you can serve companies in the Philippines or Asia or wherever, because the community of listeners of the Hello World podcast is actually in four different continents. Peter, by all means, HCR and how you can serve others.
Well, we love to work with people in organizations, right? And we feel that people are the most important part of an organization. We could think of them as a resource, but they're so much more than that, right? People bring their whole self to work, and when we can encourage them to do that, everyone benefits from it. So we have a range of sort of technological and process solutions around that. We have automated organization charts that clearly show key metrics about the people, not just the structure of the organization, something that is automatically updated from the HR system. We have a great learning experience platform. It's a bit like YouTube for the enterprise. So, if you're stuck on some job on your car, you want to do something, you don't quite know how, you go to YouTube, you watch a 5-minute video, you know how to do it. So it's delivery of training and information exactly when and where and what is needed at the time. And that now we're happy to be able to work with organizations to improve their psychological safety. So we feel that what we're doing benefits not only the organization commercially, but the people within the organization individually. And that's really what drives us.
And also thinking of it outside of organizations, Peter, if people get to learn about this, get to behave to protect psychological safety in the workplace, it will extend to your other dealings with people outside of work, bringing it to families, yes, and eventually society benefits as a whole.
Agree. People talk about a work-life balance, but really they're all part of the same thing, aren't they?
Uh, Pleased to have learned a lot, Peter, about psychological safety. And this is what I like most in doing the Hello World podcast. We cover different topics from in each of those letters. And once again, this is about leadership, inclusive leadership, leadership that should promote and should role model psychological safety. Peter, you are a very welcome guest here. Thank you so much. We owe you a lot for saying yes and for enlightening our listeners as well on this phrase that I would know people would have heard of psychological safety recently. Now we know better, and now we know how to act better to ensure this.
Thank you, Louis. I really appreciate it and enjoyed being here. Great privilege to be talking to you and your listeners. So thank you so much for having me.
To our community of listeners in Hello World Podcast, Peter Brace, our guest for this episode on inclusive leadership. Hello, world!
Hi, this is Louis Banta, CEO and Chief Consultant of LJMB or Learning Just Made Better. Thanks for watching my video. To get more videos like this, click subscribe and hit the bell icon below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, comment down below, and share this to others.